So, 18 poems, 9 themes. But which poems map onto which themes? Let's find out. How is it going, Revision Squad? It's me, Liam, aka Mr. Knight, aka DystopiaJunkie, and I am back with another GCSE Poetry Anthology revision video for you. I've had quite a few comments asking me to go over the poems together, to talk about their themes and whatnot, and to maybe talk a little bit about comparison. So you know what? That's what I thought I'd do for you. Grab a pen and some paper so that you can make notes of the things that I say over this video, and as ever, if this video is helpful, please do let me know by liking, commenting and subscribing. Okay, so here we have a grid that covers all of the poems in the anthology and eventually all of the themes that I will be discussing in relation to those poems. Now that does not necessarily mean that these will be the only themes that could come up in your exam. But I think that I've got a good enough spread here that you should be suitably equipped to tackle any question thrown at you, as long as you don't panic and think creatively. Now I do apologise if the grid is a little small, but we've got a lot to squeeze into one table. Now if this is my grid, how am I going to fill it? Well, I'll be putting in ticks where I think a poem is relevant to a theme, and an exclamation mark where I think it is particularly interesting in relation to that theme. Now I won't be spending any time talking about the poems that don't relate to a certain theme, because you know what, I think that's just going to waste your precious time. Right, so when I'm talking about the theme of power, I'm looking at whether someone or something has lots of power or not. This could mean lots of things, like strength, political power, wealth, the freedom to make choices, and so on. So the manhunt is about power, as Eddie is shown to be powerless, and his PTSD controls him. Sonnet 43 is about the power of love. London shows the everyday citizen to be powerless. She Walks in Beauty could be said to be about powerful emotions, and so too could As Imperceptibly as Grief. Cozy Apologia is about the power of nature and how the power of love is perhaps greater than this. Valentine is also about the power of love. A Wife in London is about powerful emotions and is also about how the wife and her husband are powerless. Death of a Naturalist is about the power of nature. Afternoons presents people, especially women, as being passive and therefore powerless in their own lives. Dulce Decorum Est is about the devastating power of war and also the powerlessness of soldiers, as is Mamet's Wood. The Prelude is about the power of nature. So I've said that in my opinion there are 3 poems that are particularly interesting with regards to this theme. Living Space is interesting as, although the people living in the slums have little power, they have not given up hope. Hawk Roosting is interesting as it shows the arrogance that power can bring, which is also more or less why I've claimed that Ozymandias is interesting. I wonder if Hawk Roosting and Ozymandias would be nice poems to compare. Now when I'm talking about the theme of nature, I'm talking about the natural world. Animals, plants, the weather, landscape, the environment, whatever. So Cozy Apologia, well, that's about nature because it's about extreme weather. Hawk Roosting is, funnily enough, about a hawk, which was an animal the last time I checked. But it's also about the viciousness of nature. To Autumn is about the environment, the seasons, and how man interacts with landscape. Ozymandias shows us how nature, in this case a desert, will outlast man. So I've selected Death of a Naturalist and Excerpt from the Prelude as my interesting poems for this theme, as they both show how nature can be both fascinating, wonderful, beautiful, and so on, but it can also be terrifying, hellish, and confrontational. These poems, which compare nicely, provide more nuanced depictions of the natural world. Love can mean many things. Romance, friendship, love for your family, deep admiration and fascination, and, to an extent, arrogance, which I guess is kind of self-love. So the manhunt depicts Laura and Eddie's love. Sonnet 43, well, it's a sonnet, that traditional form of love poem. She Walks in Beauty is about love, or at the very least, lust. Cozy Apologia is about Rita Dove's love for her husband Fred. A Wife in London is about a relationship and the pain that grief brings. Deep, deep, deep fascination is at the centre of Death of a Naturalist. To Autumn is immensely passionate about the eponymous season. Afternoons depicts faded, softened love, and also the love that mothers have for their children. And the Prelude, well, that depicts an intense love for nature. I've identified 3 poems as being particularly interesting here. Both Ozymandias and The Soldier depict slightly less obvious forms of love, arrogance and self-love in Ozymandias, and nationalistic love in The Soldier, using the sonnet form, which is one of the most typical forms of love poems going. Valentine uses a completely irregular form to express love, possibly because the likely non-heterosexual love that it depicts was not fully accepted or seen as conventional when the poem was written. When I say war, that could mean that a poem is either explicitly about a war, battlefields, soldiers, and so on, but it could also mean the impact that war has on people, and not necessarily just soldiers. The Soldier, well, it's about a soldier preparing for his heroic death. Dulce is about soldiers, possibly unprepared, facing death. Those 2 poems, they contrast wonderfully. Mamet's Wood is about soldiers in battle too, as well as the impact that war had on the surrounding landscape. I've said that the manhunt is interesting in relation to this theme, as it shows the impact of war that lasts beyond the battlefield. This is also true of A Wife in London, in which we never see the husband soldier fight, only the impact that his death, itself caused by war, has on his wife. The theme of time can relate to a specific time, the progression of time, or even change, which can only happen as time passes. The manhunt is about how Eddie's PTSD is more strongly understood by Laura as time passes. London suggests that nothing changes, how time is almost at a bit of a standstill, and it's also very clearly a product of a specific time. As imperceptibly as grief shows how strong feelings can pass eventually. Death of a Naturalist is about a change. To Autumn is very literally about the passing of a season. Dulce is about a specific time in history, as is Mamet's Wood, although in that second example it's about both the past, war, and the present, today. The Prelude is about a specific time in a person's life, as well as a profound change that happens in it. I've got 3 poems in particular that I think are interesting in relation to this theme. A Wife in London shows us the cruelty of time, due to the twisted order in which she receives the messages. Afternoons is about a particular phase in people's lives, and how this may seem like a bit of a cage. Ozymandias shows us that, in the end, time beats everything, and will have the final laugh. When I'm talking about the theme of place, I mean a few different things. For instance, if the poem is about a particular place, then it's relevant. If it's about how people interact with a space, then yeah, that too, that's also relevant. London, well, it's about London. To Autumn depicts people interacting with the countryside at harvest time. Mamet's Wood is about an actual location, and the Prelude, it shows children interacting with their rural surroundings. With regards to this theme, The Soldier is interesting because of its nationalistic tone and the way in which England has been personified as female. Living Space is interesting as it shows people struggling, yet still surviving, maybe even thriving, in a difficult, perhaps even hostile, environment. When thinking about the theme of man, I mean a poem that is about a specific person, group of people, or even mankind more generally. The manhunt is about 2 specific people and their relationship, as is Sonnet 43. London is about a group of people, Londoners. The soldier is, well, it's about a soldier. She Walks in Beauty is about one person's view of another. Living Space is about the people living in the Mumbai slums. As Imperceptibly as Grief is about one person's intense feelings. Cozy Apologia is about real specific people. Valentine is about a human relationship. A Wife in London is about a person's reaction to a situation. Death of a Naturalist is about a young person. To Autumn is about mankind interacting with nature. Dolce is about a group of soldiers. Ozymandias is obviously about a specific person. And Mamet's Wood is about a group of soldiers. And finally the Prelude, that's also about a young person. Now I'll be honest with you, hold my hands up, I think this theme is the most broad and vague. Afternoons might be the most interesting poem that is relevant to this theme, given that it is looking at a particular stage in people's lives, and also because of the way Larkin depicts women. But it doesn't stand out loads compared to the other poems that are relevant to this theme. If you're thinking more about gender, you might want to think about The Manhunt, or She Walks in Beauty, or even Sonnet 43, and think about how gender is depicted in those poems as well. Now I'll be honest with you, the most interesting poem in relation to the theme of man is probably Hawk Roosting, because it is the only poem in the anthology that does not explicitly feature a person. Now if you wanted to say that the hawk was a symbol for a specific person or a specific type of person, now I think you're going somewhere. Death can be about a literal death, i.e. someone or something dying, or it can be about a metaphorical death. It could therefore apply to loss more generally. So let's think about how that might be relevant to the anthology poems. The Soldier is about a soldier literally preparing for their likely death. As Imperceptibly as Grief is implicitly about loss, given that the persona is grieving. A Wife in London is clearly about death. The hawk kills things in Hawk Roosting. Nature has to die, and you could even argue that autumn dies only to be resurrected next year, so that man can live in To Autumn. A soldier dies in Dolce, and many soldiers die in Mamet's Wood. The poems that are most interesting, in relation to this theme that is, are the ones that deal with death or loss metaphorically. In Death of a Naturalist and The Prelude, there is a loss of innocence, the death of one's childhood. Have I said yet that those poems compare really nicely? Furthermore, London could be seen about the metaphorical death of the individual, given how controlling and gloomy London is presented as being. And finally we have religion. This theme applies to any poem that is explicitly about religion, uses religious language or imagery, refers to any sort of god or faith, and so on. If a poem includes the idealization of something, I guess religion could apply too. London seems to criticise religion, as seen in the references made to the church. The hawk in Hawk Roosting compares itself to, and sort of mocks, the Christian God. And Ozymandias does a similar thing in the poem named after him. I'll give an honourable mention here to Living Space and To Autumn. There is a reference to faith in Living Space, and autumn seems to be almost revered in To Autumn, but I don't know if there's enough in either poem to warrant a complete essay. Sonnet 43 is particularly interesting, as it is the poem that has the most, if not the only poem that has, a positive view of religion. And even then, Elizabeth Barrett Browning seems to idolise her future husband more than she does God. So, that's a quick overview of each theme in the anthology. Remember that another theme could come up, because you know what, I can't predict the future sadly. But hopefully this should have equipped you adequately so that you can deal with whatever the exams throw at you, given that you use a little creative thinking and don't panic. Now as you can see, I've added another row to the bottom of the table. In that I've tallied how many of the themes each poem applies to. The tallies range between 3 out of 9 and a 7 out of 9. What this should tell you is that, although some poems are definitely more useful than others, in my view at least, no single poem applies to every single theme. That means you can't just rely on knowing 1 or 2 poems. I've underlined some of the poems too. My criteria for this was that they had to apply to at least 6 of the themes and be interesting in relation to at least 2 of them. This makes them particularly good for those comparison questions, which I might be thinking about soon in a future video. Thanks for watching this video. I hope it's helped you to think a bit more clearly about the themes in the WJEC Eduqas Poetry Anthology. If you want more details about any of the poems, please have a look at my playlist for the anthology, as each poem is analysed in depth over there. If this video has helped you out, please do let me know by giving it a like, dropping it a comment, and if you aren't already, subscribing to my channel too. As ever, I hope that you have an awesome rest of the day. If you are revising, please do remember to take frequent short breaks, as a burned out student is not a happy or successful student, which is what I think you deserve to be. So that is how the poems in the WJEC Eduqas Poetry Anthology relate to various themes. But now, thinking about those different themes, which poems might be really useful for you to compare? Why don't you let me know down in the comments section below? Cheers.